Dariush, I'm having a hard time stopping thinking about him. He's the main event, and there's a number of headlines surfacing about the card and about what's going on, and there's some push and a pull. I mean, we lost Dan Hooker, and you've just got these different adjustments. Somebody had missed. It wasn't they had missed weight, but they got scrapped in the whole card. Got a new lineup. I'm just telling you things off the top of my head. I keep on hearing about this card. I have not seen anything on Benny, who is the main event, of everything going on with the card. I spent more time. I saw a video of it was actually Benny's opponent confronting Bobby Green. That did real good numbers. I see a number of stuff about this, but I don't see it from Benny. So I watched Benny's press conference, and Benny had said that he has nothing to gain from the fight. It doesn't do anything for him. And fair enough. It's fair enough. I haven't seen anything that Benny has ever said. He's such a gentleman. I mean, he is such a nice guy. I want to say one time he even asked for a car that had been delayed. Like, he used his interview to do that. Wasn't that Benny? And they delivered him the car. I mean, like, he's never done anything wrong. I can't think of a time he's ever used profanity. I can't think of any time he's even raised his voice. Like, I would have nothing but kind memories of Beneil Dariush. But there are a number of stats that I would find to be very helpful stats for Benny, but he doesn't bring them up. For example, the interview that I'm referencing, when Benny said, I have nothing to gain from this fight, he qualified that statement by saying, I'm ranked higher than my opponent. So if I lose, I could definitely fall, but I can't gain. I can't go further fighting a guy that's lower ranked. Like, I had never thought of any of those things, but the logic, I mean, his math seems to make sense. Seems like a very difficult thing to argue with. Seems very logical, as a matter of fact. It has nothing to do with any viewer's calculation. Like, there is nobody that will be in attendance that night or at home watching that has ever thought about what he just said. But now that it's been said, it is definitely a fair point by him. All right. So, but when you're looking at those numbers, when you're trying to be logical, the amount of times that he has main evented, just for example, the amount of fights that he had won in a row, just for example, if you factor in the losses that he's had with the wins that he's had and the overall record in any meaningful period of time, like, there were some numbers that are extremely beautiful and beneficial to Benny, but much like I told you, much like there is nobody that will be in attendance that night that bought a ticket, and there will be nobody at home watching the fight that had any idea what Benny said. And they never thought about it ahead of time. I mean, none. Nobody has ever thought you're ranked this and this guy's ranked lower, and therefore if you beat him, regardless of how you beat him, you can't go ahead, because you can't go ahead doing what you're supposed to do. Like, that is completely correct. Like, that is a really logical point that would hold up in a court of law, even against 12 people that weren't smart enough to get out of jury duty. Like, they'd still be able to understand that. But they'd never once thought about it. Much like they've never thought that Benny has main evented more UFCs than anybody in history to not be given a title fight. That Benny has a better record than anybody in history to not be given a title fight. When you put it over the focus of longevity, that Benny has remained in the top 5 longer than anybody in company history to not be given a title fight. Like, there's a number of numbers. If you're just being logical, you're just being fair, you're not a showman, it's the entertainment era, but you're not going to be part of it. You're going to be a real objective, fair person. There's a lot of numbers that are really helpful that could have been brought up. Now, I don't say this to adjust Benny's course. He's happy. A lot of guys say, I don't care if I get a title shot, as a way of getting a title shot. They'll say, oh, this isn't about the money, as a way of getting more money. Benny is very sincere. He is happy with where he's at. And when I tell you I've never once heard him use words that could help him, ever once, I have never heard a statement or a call out or a proper demand from him. I don't say that to put him down. Take that. Take what I just said. In the middle of the entertainment era, your main event, who will be given more media opportunities than anybody, just by design and default, that you're the headliner, has never got one right. But it's the main event. You know how hard it is to become a main event? Do you know anybody that's a main event that you could produce for me? Even you real smart guys who lost his last fight? Do you know a guy in a main event who's favored to win? I mean, you bring in a guy that lost his last fight to go out there and do the job against the guy that you're shining up. We see that all the time. It's called passing of the torch. That isn't the case here. Benny is actually ranked higher. Do you know anybody who is a main event? When you want to talk about numbers, you want to talk about being logical, Benny's putting himself down through logical numbers. I can't disagree with him. As he insults himself and qualifies it through evidence known as the rankings, I can't disagree with it. But I'd still like you to answer the question if we're just being logical. Do you know of anybody that has main evented coming off of a loss? You do. Do you know of anybody who has main evented and was favored to win, which means he's the guy getting shined up? He's the guy that, at least in theory, is getting ready to go over, who's coming off of a loss. Can you answer that same question and tell me if that loss was by finish? So, when I look at everything being done, wrong is going too far. There's a different way to do this. When I look at everything that is being done, unhelpful, and I still look at the main event status with an expectation of victory, which would lead to an expectation of another main event. It just really makes you wonder, how big of a star are we dealing with here? How big of a star potential are we dealing with that in the middle of the entertainment era, in spite of not providing that level of entertainment, you have provided such incredible success and you've demonstrated skills that have earned the respect of your peers that you are a main event. There was a angle done in the very late 90s. Al Snow headed this up, but it was called the Job Squad. And in professional wrestling at that time, they never let you behind the curtain. It had just started. Everybody's belief, in fact, was if you ever let anybody behind the curtain, if anybody ever sees behind the curtain, we are out of business. It is of paramount importance that we protect and preserve the fooling of the audience. Nobody had predicted that you could let the audience in on it, that you could just tell them this is entertainment and it's nothing else. Nobody had predicted that or seen that coming. So right when they're getting in the middle, right when they're kind of letting you behind the curtain, Al Snow came out and he lets the audience know that there's something in the industry called a jobber. You have to be a really good wrestler. You have to be a really talented guy, but you have a different job, which is you're going to make it really look like it hurt. You're going to sell for the other guy and you're going to put him over. It takes a real skill. You make a bunch of money. You don't get to have near as much fun. So he came out with an angle called the Job Squad, and he wore a t-shirt. It said, "Pen me, pay me." And of course it got over, right? It was one of these spots where even though it wasn't designed by the promoter, even though whatever had been done apparently had been done wrong, and even though he was admitting all of these things, he was still getting TV time and he was still going up the card. There was something about the truth that seemed to really serve him. And I only make that comparison because I look at Beneil Dariush and go, well, what kind of star are we potentially dealing with here? This is a guy who the only thing that's held him back is his own words. The only one that said he shouldn't get anything for winning in a main event on ESPN in a sold-out arena in a company called the UFC is him. But I could keep playing that. I could play that 20 more times. Like the only one that ever stops the acceleration of his career is him. And he's still the main event. In spite of everything, he's still the main event. That's never been done. We have never had a person verbally shoot themselves in the foot this many times and stay on top of the bill. And it just makes for a very interesting question. How big of a star are we actually dealing with here? If things were done right, including the right to remain silent, so you just didn't go backwards, there's not a person on earth that even would have considered the fact that Benny doesn't gain something with a win in a main event until he said it. If he would have just remained silent, we could be here as opposed to here. I'm just suggesting for you, and I mean it in the form of a compliment. How big of a star was he supposed? Was he meant? How big of a star were we dealing with here, potentially?